We are talking about the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, as most people know it. For decades, this law has been held up as this bedrock mechanism that lets any citizen peek behind the curtain.
Right, to see what our government is up to. That's the key phrase.
It is. It's all about accountability and hopefully preventing malfeasance before it even happens.
That is the promise. And, it's a really powerful one. But as we get into the material for today, the reality of FOIA is, well, it seems to operate in two deeply contrasting and, frankly, pretty disappointing extremes.
Okay, so what's the first extreme?
On one hand, you have this vital democratic tool that's been successfully, I guess co-opted is the word. It's been utilized and ultimately just overwhelmed by commercial interests. It has basically morphed into this machine that we're calling FOIA Inc., and it functions as a massive hidden corporate subsidy for the information industry.
So a law designed for accountability is now being used primarily for profit. That's one side of the coin.
That's one side.
What's the other?
The flip side is when you try to use that exact same law to pierce the veil of the deepest, darkest government secrets.
You're talking about national defense, classified tech.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The intelligence community. When you go after that kind of information, it often fails completely. It just hits this immediate, impermeable wall of secrecy, of statutory exemptions, and increasingly of purposeful privatization.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive.
Our mission today is to really unpack this dual failure. We'll start by looking at the mechanics of FOIA, highlighting the staggering costs and the financial subsidies that are baked into this whole commercial data mining enterprise.
And then we shift gears.
And then we shift gears completely. We'll examine the resulting opacity, the total lack of transparency, when government secrecy intersects with technology, with contractors, and with really sensitive defense information.
And we're going to look specifically at the Department of Defense. We'll look at their contemporary struggles with unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, and see how this kind of structural separation just completely defeats the purpose of transparency.
We have a lot to cover, so let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the basics. Let's unpack the foundational structure of this law. The legal premise of FOIA, which goes all the way back to 1966, it seems simple enough. And I think that's supposed to be its strength.
It is. The idea is that it allows any person, and that's a direct quote from the law, any person can submit a request for records from executive agencies.
So that means a journalist, a historian,
a corporation, or just a curious citizen. It doesn't matter who you are.
And critically, there's a timeline, right? Agencies are supposed to respond quickly.
They are. The legal mandate includes a required timeline. Agencies must respond promptly. The specified time frame is 20 working days.
20 working days.
That's the official legal expectation for the vast majority of requests, unless there are what they call unusual circumstances.
Okay, 20 working days. That sounds pretty reasonable for democratic oversight. I mean, you can get information in about a month.
It sounds reasonable, but when you look at the data, the bureaucratic reality is, well, it's a completely different universe.
So what does the data tell us? What's the state of the delay and the backlog across the federal government right now?
The burden is just immense, and the delay is systemic. I mean, you look at the official data on processing times, and that mandate basically collapses.
It just falls apart.
It does. Across the federal government as a whole, the overall average processing time for a complex request, so something that requires a significant search or a lot of review, is a staggering 118 days.
118 days. That's nearly 6 times the legal limit.
It is. And even for so-called simple requests, the average time still creeps just over that 20-day deadline across the whole government.
118 days for a complex request. That's not just a minor delay. I mean, a delay like that could make the information completely useless for a journalist on a deadline.
Absolutely. Or for an investigation that's trying to influence a current policy debate, it just fundamentally undermines the whole purpose of timely oversight.
Because the information just goes stale.
It loses its currency so quickly. For accountability to actually work, the disclosure has to be relevant to the current political moment. If you want to really grasp the sheer scale of this bureaucratic inertia, you just have to look at the oldest pending requests reported at the end of fiscal year 2014.
Okay, what did they find?
Some of those requests dated all the way back to 1993.
Wait, a request that had been filed, logged, and was still waiting for a resolution after more than 20 years?
20 years.
That's That's not a backlog. That's administrative petrification.
It's an information graveyard. And, we actually have this incredible anecdote that really drives home the practical human element of this bureaucratic friction and its impact on genuine scholarship.
Okay.
It's the story of historian Dr. Monty Finkelstein.
Tell us about Dr. Finkelstein. How did he experience this 20-year delay?
So Dr. Finkelstein was working on a project about the mafia and Sicilian independence. And he filed several requests way back in 1993 to agencies like the FBI, the CIA, the National Archives.
So he was doing his due diligence as a historian.
He was, and he was on a timeline to finish his book, which he did eventually publish in 1998. He made, a huge effort to be timely, submitting his requests as early as he possibly could.
Right.
And he noted that while some requests were eventually filled, the delays often forced him to fundamentally reorganize or even rewrite whole portions of his manuscript. It delayed its completion, and it altered the scope of his work. The slow, grinding pace of FOIA was literally shaping the history he was trying to write.
That's fascinating. So the information that should be the source material is instead acting as a constraint on the scholarly work itself.
Precisely. He finally just gave up waiting for certain documents he'd requested from the FBI and the CIA because he suspected they would never be declassified in his lifetime, let alone in time for his book.
And then what happened?
Then, in 2011, that's 18 years after his initial filing, he gets an inquiry from the government about his original request.
18 years after the book is long since published. How did he even respond to that?
He noted that, while he was obviously no longer working on Sicilian separatism, he absolutely still wanted the materials.
Of course.
He wanted them, if only for what he called personal reasons. He specifically said he wanted to satisfy his curiosity and see what was so important that it had to wait 18 years for release.
I can't even imagine.
He highlighted that for historians who are trying to write the definitive work on any sensitive subject, receiving materials that late, it just makes the work impossible. You can't produce cutting-edge research when the government is operating on a multi-decade timeline.
The journey itself just sounds emotionally taxing.
It was a total roller coaster. He mentioned that one specific request to the FBI about Lucky Luciano had to be made twice because the documents he got the first time were so heavily redacted they were useless.
Just blacked out pages.
Right. But on the other hand, he described the surprise of getting CIA documents unexpectedly after only 2 years. He said he was stunned and elated.
Wow.
It just shows that the system is completely inconsistent, it's arbitrary, and it often requires this relentless bureaucratic struggle to get anything done.
That perfectly illustrates how FOIA's request-driven structure, combined with those glacial response times, creates this historical record that's often just too late for meaningful scholarly or journalistic impact.
Exactly.
But, despite this immense friction, FOIA is still the engine that drives democratic accountability when it succeeds.
Let's shift to those successes. What are some of those high-profile wins where the watchdog function actually delivered?
Right, because when the system works, it works.
Yep.
FOIA provides this indisputable documented evidence of government action or, more often government failure.
Okay, give us an example. Take the exploitation of student visas. A media request demonstrated that the Department of State had completely failed to track complaints about the widespread exploitation of students under the J-1 visa program, all the way up until 2010.
And this was despite massive problems existing for years before that, right?
Oh, absolutely. An Associated Press investigation had already uncovered widespread abuse involving hundreds of students in over a dozen states.
So the FOIA request just confirmed it.
It produced the records that forced the agency's failure, its deliberate lack of tracking into the public light, and that sparked necessary reforms. That's accountability by exposure.
And what about accountability for specific, bad behavior inside government organizations?
We saw that with the crucial documentation that the Washington Post got. It detailed misconduct by the director of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency.
Okay.
The report detailed how the director improperly gave preferential treatment to a subordinate, required subordinates to perform personal tasks for him, and even allowed a family member to use the agency's firing range.
Wow. And that all came from a FOIA request.
It did. That 40-page investigative report took 7 months to produce, so still a significant delay, but it provided the necessary factual foundation for action against high-level corruption.
The public health disclosures are also surprising. That's not typically what you think of when you imagine classified government documents.
No, but FOIA definitely serves as a public safety check. Documents obtained by PETA, the animal rights organization, showed that an elephant performing with the Ringling Bros circus in Baltimore posed a health risk to the public.
Why?
Because she had tested positive for tuberculosis. That's a direct public safety disclosure that affected thousands of potential audience members.
And maybe the most classic function of all, just correcting a government lie.
Absolutely. Records obtained about a big oil spill into a tributary of South Carolina's Frohawk Creek showed that the spill was far more extensive than officials had initially admitted.
What did they say at first?
The city engineer and an EPA coordinator initially estimated only about 1,000 to 1,500 gallons had leaked.
And the real number?
FOIA records revealed the State Department of Health and Environmental Control documented 10,000 gallons had spilled. The disclosure of that record corrected the public lie and ensured the full extent of the environmental damage was finally acknowledged.
So we have this indispensable tool that, okay, it sometimes takes 2 decades to deliver, but when it does, it can expose specific instances of corruption, public health risks, or just outright deception. It's clearly an indispensable engine for accountability.
It is.
But if FOIA is such a necessary engine, who exactly is consuming all that fuel? Is it mainly journalists and historians, or is it someone else?
And that is the essential transition point. The fact that FOIA is so indispensable for journalists is what leads us directly to the dark side of this, the overwhelming commercial capture of the entire system.
This is where the core purpose of FOIA gets completely inverted. We need to focus on FOIA Inc. This is the phenomenon that describes how a system designed for democratic transparency is now primarily being used to funnel massive amounts of government-generated data into private databases.
Right. And then those private companies turn around and sell that data for massive profits.
It's a systemic breakdown.
It really is. It transforms a public good into a private commodity. And to understand how this works, you have to start with the definition of commercial use.
Okay.
A commercial use request is officially defined as seeking information for a purpose that furthers a commercial, trade, or profit interest. This can even include using the information to further those interests in the lawsuit. The agency decides this, case by case, based on what the requester says they're going to do with it.
And for these commercial requesters, the law says they have to be charged fees, right?
What?
They pay for the search time, the duplication, the review. So why does that process, which seems designed to recoup costs, turn into a massive corporate subsidy?
It all comes down to the definition of direct costs versus what things actually cost.
Okay, what's a direct cost?
A direct cost is very narrowly defined. It's basically the salary of the employee performing the work, plus a small percentage, usually about 16%, tacked on for benefits, and the cost of operating the equipment, like printers or scanners.
So they're paying the wage of the worker. What's missing from that calculation?
Critically, direct costs do not include overhead expenses.
What does that mean?
It means the government cannot charge the commercial requester for the cost of the physical office space they occupy, the electricity for the lights, the heating or air conditioning,
IT infrastructure.
the IT infrastructure that maintains the system, or the salaries of the people who manage the FOIA process overall. None of that is included.
So the government is basically paying the rent, the utilities, the IT support, and the administrative oversight for private companies to mine federal data, which they then turn around and resell.
That's it.
That sounds like the literal definition of a subsidy, hiding in plain sight.
It is an unjustifiable subsidy, and the numbers. The numbers reveal the staggering size of the burden. This dramatic discrepancy between the costs the government incurs and the fees it collects is the smoking gun.
Okay, let's look at the FDA example from fiscal year 2013, which you said is a perfect case study.
It is. I want to pause on this number because it's genuinely shocking.
Go ahead.
In FY 2013, the cost that was attributable specifically to commercial requesters at the FDA was estimated at $17.6 million.
$17.6 million. That's the government spending nearly $18 million to service requests just from for-profit companies.
Yes. And how much money do you think the FDA recouped?
It has to be a fraction of that.
The total fees collected from all requesters, so that's commercial, journalists, nonprofits, everybody at the FDA that year were only $577,039.
Wait, let me get this straight. Nearly $18 million in costs are being generated by commercial requesters, and the entire agency only collected roughly $500,000 total.
That's right.
That means the public subsidy for this information industry just at the FDA was over $17 million in 1 year.
Precisely. Commercial requesters are, on average, charged far less frequently and far lower dollar amounts than the true operational cost of servicing their requests. This gap, that $17 million difference between resources expended and money collected, functions as an enormous silent form of corporate subsidy.
And who are the key players enjoying this taxpayer discount? We're talking about these information resellers.
Right. These are businesses that specialize in mining this publicly funded data and then repackaging it as a product. They're the dedicated brokers of public information.
What do they do?
They request public records at a really high volume, often automating the process, and then they resell the records themselves as a private, paywalled commodity. It's a whole cottage industry that focuses on specific data sets from particular agencies.
So let's look at how they operate. Let's start with financial data mining at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC.
The SEC is a goldmine because of the massive amount of corporate regulatory filings it handles. Take a company like Bioscience Advisors, for example. In 2013, they were the fourth largest requester at the SEC. They filed 1,323 distinct requests.
And what is their product?
Their product is a database called BioCB.
And what does BioCDB contain?
It contains copies of over 12,000 agreements. So think licensing, development, joint venture, and distribution contracts. Many of these exhibits are buried deep within public SEC filings, but they were held under a confidential treatment rule for a specific period.
So they were hidden for a while.
Right, but once that period expires, the public can request them, and Bioscience Advisors does this systematically through FOIA.
So they're using the FOIA system to scoop up raw data that large corporations don't want their competitors to easily find, and then they're selling access back to those very same corporations.
Exactly.
What's the price tag for this publicly sourced intelligence?
It's extremely lucrative. A one-year subscription to the BioCDB service costs clients $9,500.
$9,500.
This is the perfect distillation of the problem. The public pays the cost of collecting and processing the data, and then private industry sells the resulting product back to other private companies at an exorbitant rate, all while claiming this massive subsidy from the taxpayer.
Okay, let's move to the world of pharmaceuticals and regulatory data. The FDA must be another huge target, given its oversight role.
Oh, absolutely. Companies like FDA News, which operates under FOI Services, Inc., and then you have massive entities like Thomson Reuters. They're major institutional players.
And what are they requesting?
They routinely request Establishment Inspection Reports, or EIRs, and Form 483 inspection reports. The 483s specifically are the forms that document observations of potential violations found during facility inspections.
And why are those inspection reports so valuable to a pharmaceutical or a biotech company?
They're competitive intelligence. I mean, if you're a competitor, knowing the deficiencies of a rival's manufacturing facility or being able to anticipate a future regulatory action, that can be invaluable for your own market positioning.
So these reports feed into these for-pay database products.
They do. They track regulatory compliance globally.
And Thomson Reuters, which covers the entire life sciences industry.
Their FOIA requests are believed to directly feed their database products under the umbrella name Cortellis. Their Cortellis regulatory intelligence product is explicitly advertised as including documents that were obtained through FOIA requests.
What are they going after?
They primarily request those EIRs and then the subsequent correspondence between the FDA and the inspected facilities. They're transforming government-generated oversight data into proprietary competitive intelligence for their massive client base. It's just a direct flow of taxpayer-funded regulatory oversight into a commercial product.
That is truly outrageous. If they're using publicly funded data for private gain, doesn't that fundamentally undermine the government's regulatory purpose by restricting who can even access the information?
It absolutely does, and the problem extends even into defense contracts. We see systematic data mining of military-adjacent commercial data. Commercial requesters uniformly request contracts, bids, and bid abstracts for specific contracts from the Defense Logistics Agency, or DLA.
And the DLA is responsible for the entire supply chain for the military.
Exactly. This just shows a focused, systematic mining operation purely interested in government contracting data. It allows private defense contractors or suppliers to track their competitors' pricing, their awards, their terms. It's highly focused commercial data extraction.
And finally, environmental due diligence. I have to imagine the need for information on contamination sites for commercial real estate deals must be constant.
It is a core service. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, is just flooded with requests from firms like ECC and Hillman Consulting.
Right.
They regularly file requests for site-specific environmental records that are needed for commercial real estate transactions. This information, like historical land use, pollution permits, known hazards, it's critical for assessing environmental risk before a transaction closes.
This sounds like a specialized market that's designed solely to exploit FOIA's delays and access issues.
It is. This necessity has generated a specialized FOIA compliance market. You have firms like the FOIA Group that advertise that their very aggressive use of the law gets results for their customer.
And they charge for that service.
Oh, yeah. They charge upwards of $95 per request for this specialized service. They're effectively middlemen who have mastered the bureaucracy so they can charge a premium for what should be readily available public data.
The scale of this corporate usage fundamentally burdens the system. It contributes to the delays we talked about earlier, and it detracts severely from the original democratic purpose of the law.
It does.
You mentioned that one proposed countermeasure is something called affirmative disclosure. How does this attempt to claw back control from FOIA, Inc.?
So affirmative disclosure is the idea of proactively releasing frequently requested records without waiting for an individual request to be filed. The logic is simple. If the public already requests a document 100 times, why not just put it online once for everyone?
Right.
The challenge of the volume and the delay makes this necessary, and it's the government's attempt to reclaim public records from being paywalled by the private market.
Does this strategy actually work in practice? And where has it been successful?
It has worked brilliantly at the EPA. It offers a genuine success story. The EPA historically received 80% of its FOIA requests for those site-specific environmental records we just talked about.
80%. That is a staggering majority of their requests coming from a single category.
It is. So the agency responded by launching a public website that provided searchable environmental records and due diligence certificates. According to a senior FOIA official, this initiative immediately preempted 80% of those requests.
Wow.
It freed up massive resources, and it made the information equally available to every citizen, every journalist, and, yes, every real estate firm. And in doing so, it cut out the expensive middlemen.
That's a massive win. It proves that smart, proactive disclosure can significantly reduce the corporate tax on the FOIA system. So why doesn't every agency follow that model? Especially the FDA, given their $17 million subsidy issue.
And the FDA provides the perfect example of the complexity inherent in this process. It highlights why affirmative disclosure isn't a silver bullet for every agency.
Why not?
While those Form 483s are intensely requested by the information resellers, the FDA noted that only about 25% to 35% of the total 10,000 to 12,000 forms they issue annually are ever requested under FOIA.
Oh, I see.
The remaining 65% to 75% are never subject to a formal request for release.
So proactively releasing all the forms would require the agency to process and review the entire batch, even the ones nobody ever asked for.
Precisely. The challenge is that a review is needed for each record to protect confidential commercial information. That's Exemption 4 protection.
And what would that protect on a Form 483?
It might shield proprietary manufacturing methods, drug formulations, or sensitive process controls. Reviewing 100% of the forms proactively would require substantially more administrative work and thus more cost than processing only the 25% to 35% that are requested.
So it would actually increase the administrative burden.
Significantly, yes, and without a clear public need for the records that were never requested in the first place.
That's a critical distinction. The EPA's environmental records were relatively simple. They were location-based, easy to sanitize. But the FDA's records contain highly sensitive proprietary data that's incredibly complex to redact.
Exactly.
Which makes the cost-benefit of affirmative disclosure flip completely.
It does. The feasibility of proactive disclosure depends heavily on the type of record and the necessary protection against trade secrets. This complexity ensures that for high-stakes regulatory data, the FOIA processing queue remains the primary and subsidized pathway for a commercial data acquisition.
Okay, we've established that FOIA can succeed for oversight, but its structure makes it really vulnerable to commercial exploitation. Now we need to pivot to the opposite problem, where FOIA requests go to die.
Right.
We're moving behind the wall of high federal secrecy, particularly within the Department of Defense and the intelligence community.
And the scale of federal secrecy is almost incomprehensible. We mentioned that the total annual cost of FOIA across the executive branch was over $480 million back in fiscal year 2015.
Wow.
The Department of Defense, the DoD, maintains an unusually large FOIA operation and contributes a massive portion of that cost. But despite this enormous financial and bureaucratic effort, the size of the operation does not translate to transparency in sensitive areas.
This is where the core exemptions become absolute shields. We've talked a lot about Exemption 4, which protects trade secrets and is central to FOIA Inc. But the real wall for national security is Exemption 1.
Exemption 1 is the ultimate block. It covers any records that are specifically authorized under criteria established by an executive order to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy.
So, in plain language.
It means anything that's been deemed classified. The law also exempts law enforcement investigative materials. These exemptions, combined with a bureaucratic culture that is predisposed to classifying information very conservatively, make it virtually impossible for FOIA to penetrate the most sensitive intelligence or technology programs.
Let's look at a contemporary, really fascinating example that sits squarely at this intersection of defense, classification, and public curiosity. The Pentagon's official response to unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs.
The UAP issue really moved from a fringe topic to an official defense concern through the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. This act directed naval intelligence to lead something called the UAP Task Force, or UAPTF, and their directive was not speculative. It was a serious operational mandate to collect, exploit, and analyze operational and scientific and technical data of unidentified aerial phenomenon.
And just for our listeners, let's reiterate the official definition of a UAP because it's a standard term the military uses now.
Right. The UAPTF defined a UAP as any aerial phenomenon that cannot immediately be identified. And the core goal of this whole UAPTF effort was focused on standardizing reporting procedures, yes, but also fundamentally on actively destigmatizing the reporting.
Why was that so important?
It was critical because air crew often avoid reporting strange phenomena. They fear they'll be labeled the UFO or the tinfoil hat guy, or worse, lose valuable training time or professional standing. The military needed a serious mechanism for airmen to report potential national security threats without professional risk.
That context is vital. This is about defense preparedness, not tabloid headlines.
Yeah.
So what did the initial official assessment from the UAPTS, the one that was publicly released, even if it was heavily redacted, what did it tell us about what the military was actually seeing?
Well, the internal UAPTF documents from August 2020 confirmed that the phenomena are genuinely perplexing and require serious study. They collected reports dating from the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
The assessment stated that UAPs are not easily explainable, that they can quickly overwhelm our air crew, and crucially, that more than half have been detected via multiple sensors.
That last point is important.
It is, because it suggests these are not just individual sensor glitches or visual anomalies.
So if they are detected by multiple sensors, radar, infrared, visual, they are physical objects or phenomena of some kind.
That's the implication.
What potential explanations did the military offer?
The document officially listed 3 potential categories for explanation. However, 2 of those 3 categories are redacted.
Of course.
Number 2 is unknown weather or other natural phenomena. But the redacted portions fall under Exemption B1, which is classified information, and Exemption B5, which covers internal deliberative processes. So even the military's current official assessment on a topic of massive public interest remains largely obscured by classification markers. This shows Exemption 1 in action.
And despite this official UAPTF effort and the public reports, there is this persistent and growing claim from former U.S. government officials that a significant body of UAP information, the really compelling stuff, is being purposefully withheld.
Yes, and not just from the public, but from authorized members of Congress itself.
And that's the intelligence paradox that just cripples FOIA requests in this sphere.
It is. Former officials claim the Pentagon is actively withholding military intelligence databases that allegedly hold evidence of UAPs existing as physical craft of unknown origin.
But the DoD denies this.
They do. When queried directly, a DoD spokesperson countered this, stating they have found no evidence of the existence of any classified UAP program, including any Special Access Program, or SAP, that had not been properly reported to Congress.
That is a direct contradiction. If insiders are claiming these databases exist, and the DoD is claiming all the known programs have been reported, where is the information hiding? This brings us back to that structural mechanism of failure: privatization.
Program privatization is the suggested mechanism for the cover-up. And this links this whole section back to the commercial themes of FOIA, Inc. The prevailing theory is that the most sensitive UAP research, especially technology development, advanced propulsion, or alleged crash retrieval programs, has been privatized outside of core government circles.
Meaning it's held by contractors.
Possibly held at contractors like Lockheed, BDM, or SAIC.
And why does that mechanism make the information functionally immune to FOIA?
It creates a structural shield on two levels. First, it's a simple legal workaround. Contractors, unlike executive agencies, are generally exempt from FOIA. If the data or the hardware is held by Lockheed, you can't FOIA Lockheed.
And the second level.
Second, it utilizes the strict internal classification structure of the DoD itself, especially concerning the need-to-know principle.
Explain that strict need-to-know separation.
So, hardware development falls under a different branch of the DoD than intelligence reporting does. It falls under the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, or OSD.
Okay.
If a program is designated a deep black industrial SAP, meaning it involves technology and development outside of the traditional intelligence collection process, the compartmentalization is absolute. Even a high-level intelligence officer might not have a need to know about a deep black industrial-based SAP.
So if I am a high-ranking officer in the intelligence community and I file a FOIA request or even demand information internally, I can still be denied access because the information is classified as technology development managed by a private company, and my clearance doesn't cover that specific category.
Precisely. The program is completely isolated. This structural separation is reinforced if the program is a legacy holdover program from before the recent SAP restructuring efforts. This isolation is incredibly effective in maintaining secrecy and denying any FOIA pathway.
So the law only applies to the federal agency.
But the secrets are held by the exempted private company, which effectively makes FOIA useless.
That is a critical failure point in the law.
Yeah.
And this structural separation, it's reinforced by historical precedents that show a clear pattern of official disinformation. This isn't just about modern UAPs, it's a long-term strategy.
Oh, we can trace the strategy back decades. For instance, in 1953, the U.S. Air Force issued Regulation 200-2.
What did that do?
This regulation specifically required all UAP reports to be sent directly to Air Force intelligence. The key point here is that this move explicitly circumvented Project Blue Book, which was the public-facing official UAP program at the time.
So it cut off the public program from the data.
It did. It reduced the amount of information that was sent both to Congress and, crucially, to the public. They were intentionally starting the official transparent program of data while funneling the real reports into a black intelligence channel. It's institutional misdirection built right into the reporting structure itself.
And then there's the more cynical, active disinformation campaign.
Right. We have the documented example of an AFOSI counterintelligence officer named Richard C. Doty in the 1980s. Doty admitted to being involved in delivering forged documents and staging psychological operations on U.S. citizens.
Psychological operations on U.S. citizens. Wow.
The victims were citizens who had inadvertently seen highly classified aerospace projects at military installations. And Doty's goal was twofold. First, to confuse them about what they thought, often convincing them it was paranormal in origin. And second, to fuel anti-government conspiracy theories about government UFO cover-ups.
Why would they want to do that?
The goal was to discredit the witnesses and sow massive confusion, which served to protect the real, earthly, classified aerospace projects from public scrutiny.
That's a powerful, sobering example. The government was actively working against transparency, not just denying FOIA requests, but deliberately fueling paranoia and confusion to shield classified development. This wall of secrecy, exemptions, and deliberate disinformation makes the DoD's FOIA operation, despite its size and cost, functionally incapable of providing democratic oversight on these blackest of projects.
And that is the central tension we have to reconcile, the corporate capture of the available data and the impenetrable secrecy surrounding the most sensitive data.
So we've spent this deep dive exploring the two sides of the transparency coin. On one side, FOIA acts as a crucial lever. It often reveals government malfeasance, the State Department ignoring visa complaints, or the city engineer underestimating that 10,000-gallon oil spill.
Right, when watchdogs and journalists succeed in navigating that bureaucratic labyrinth.
But the very structure of the law, specifically the fee waivers, and that narrowly defined direct cost, allows the commercial sector to just
exploit the system.
Creating a multi-million-dollar unjustified corporate subsidy for data mining in lucrative areas like financial regulation, pharmaceuticals, and environmental due diligence.
Which allows publicly generated oversight data to be privatized and sold back to the market at an exorbitant cost.
And on the other extreme, when that FOIA request slams into a topic involving national security, like the UAPTF or long-standing black technology projects, the law is just rendered ineffective.
The secrets are obscured by classification exemption 1 or more structurally by the convenient practice of privatization.
Allowing contractors to hold secrets that are strategically separated from government oversight structures, like the intelligence community.
So what stands out here is that transparency is about so much more than just having the Freedom of Information Act on the books.
It is entirely reliant on the resources dedicated to upholding it, that $500 million annually, and crucially, the policies that protect it from being co-opted for profit by commercial interests or purposefully subverted by defense interests.
And the central challenge remains.
Reconciling the fundamental democratic right to know with the administrative capacity to disclose and the security impulse to classify.
So we've identified that the system is being overwhelmed by commercial requests and that the taxpayers are footing the bill. What action could be taken to reverse the effect of FOIA, Inc.?
Well, we've spent a lot of time detailing how these information resellers systematically request and track FOIA logs to identify trends and refine their business models. It's a process of self-auditing their own demand. What if government agencies themselves were mandated to apply the same technique, to actively and annually audit their own FOIA logs, to identify the records most frequently requested for commercial profit, and then proactively publish those records?
Like the EPA did.
Exactly. We saw the EPA example where they cut 80% of requests almost immediately. If that model were widely adopted, what percentage of that over $480 million annual FOIA operating cost could the government save? And how much more democratic oversight, how many more historians, journalists, and public interest groups could that freed resource capacity buy?
That's the question of political will and administrative intelligence that we will leave you to ponder.